The arrow had torn through muscle and sinew, leaving the orc warrior's shoulder a mangled mess of green flesh and dark blood that still oozed despite the crude bandage someone had hastily wrapped around it. Caleb Brennan stood in the doorway of the healer's cottage, stomach churning at the sight before him, while old Martha gripped his arm with surprising strength for a woman of 70 winters. "I cannot do it alone," she said, her voice trembling. "My hands shake too much now, and he needs those wounds cleaned and dressed properly or infection will take him. You are the only one I trust to help me." Caleb wanted to refuse. Every instinct screamed at him to walk away from the unconscious orc sprawled across Martha's large workbench, his massive frame taking up nearly the entire surface. Orcs were the enemy. They raided border settlements, killed livestock, and spread fear throughout the frontier territories. This one had been found half dead in the forest by a group of hunters who dragged him to Martha's doorstep, simply because she lived on the outskirts of town, and they did not want an orc corpse stinking up the main square. But Martha had saved Caleb's life when he was 10 years old, pulling him back from the brink of death after a farming accident nearly took his leg. He owed her everything. "What do you need me to do?" he asked quietly. Martha's relief was palpable as she released his arm and moved toward her shelves of herbs and medicines. "Heat water. Lots of it. We need to clean every wound thoroughly. Then you will hold him steady while I stitch what can be stitched." Caleb set to work, stoking the fire and hanging 2 large kettles over the flames. As the water heated, he found himself stealing glances at the orc. The warrior was massive, easily 7 feet tall with broad shoulders and thick muscles that spoke of a lifetime of combat training. His skin was a deep forest green, darker than the pale jade of the few orcs Caleb had glimpsed from a distance. Dark hair fell in a long braid down his back, and even unconscious, his face held a fierce beauty that unsettled Caleb in ways he could not name. "He is young," Martha said softly, coming to stand beside him. "Perhaps 20 summers. Someone shot him in the back while he ran. Cowards." "He is an orc," Caleb replied, but the words felt hollow even as he spoke them. "He is a living being who bleeds and hurts just as we do," Martha countered. "Now bring me that water." They worked in silence as twilight deepened into full night outside. Caleb carefully poured warm water into a basin while Martha gathered clean cloths, needle and thread, and various poultices. When everything was ready, she gestured for Caleb to begin removing the crude bandages. The fabric had stuck to dried blood and torn flesh. Caleb worked as gently as he could, wetting the bandages to loosen them, but even so the orc stirred and groaned. His eyes fluttered but did not open, lost somewhere in the depths of fever and pain. "Quickly now," Martha urged, "before he wakes fully." Caleb peeled away the last of the bandages, revealing the full extent of the damage. The arrow wound in the shoulder was the worst, but there were other injuries too: a deep gash along the ribs, bruises that painted the green skin purple and black, smaller cuts that looked like they came from brambles or rough terrain. Someone had hunted this orc through the forest like an animal. The realization made Caleb's hands gentle as he dipped a cloth into the warm water and began to clean the shoulder wound. The orc's skin was warm beneath his touch, fever hot, and the muscles jumped and twitched as Caleb worked. He tried to be thorough but quick, wiping away blood and dirt to reveal the ragged edges of torn flesh. "Press here," Martha instructed, guiding his hand to a spot above the wound. "I need to see how deep it goes." Caleb applied pressure, and the orc's entire body went rigid. A low growl rumbled from deep in his chest, and his eyes snapped open bright amber, wild with pain and confusion. Those eyes fixed on Caleb, and for a moment neither of them moved. Then the orc tried to rise to fight, and Caleb instinctively pressed him back down with both hands on his uninjured shoulder. "Stop! You will tear the wounds worse." The orc snarled something in his own language, harsh consonants and guttural sounds that Caleb could not understand. But he understood the fear in those amber eyes, the trapped animal panic of waking surrounded by humans. "We are helping you," Caleb said firmly, maintaining the pressure that kept the orc pinned. "Martha is a healer. You are safe here." Whether the orc understood the words or simply recognized that Caleb was not actively trying to kill him, something in his expression shifted. The wildness faded, replaced by exhausted wariness. His body relaxed incrementally beneath Caleb's hands. "That is good," Martha said, moving closer with her needle already threaded. "Keep him calm, Caleb. This will hurt." It did hurt. Caleb could see it in every line of the orc's body as Martha began to stitch the shoulder wound closed. The warrior's jaw clenched, tusks pressing against his lower lip hard enough to draw blood. His hands fisted in the fabric beneath him. But he did not try to rise again, did not fight them, just endured with a stoicism that seemed almost superhuman. Caleb found himself murmuring nonsense words of comfort, the same things he said to frightened horses or injured dogs. "You are doing well. It will be over soon. Just a little longer." His hand moved of its own accord to rest on the orc's uninjured shoulder, a gesture of reassurance and solidarity. The orc's eyes tracked the movement, then lifted to meet Caleb's gaze again. This time there was no fear, only a deep, questioning confusion, as if he could not quite believe what was happening. Martha worked with practiced efficiency, her shaking hands steadying when focused on a task she had performed hundreds of times. She stitched the shoulder, then moved to the gash along the ribs. Caleb kept his position, one hand maintaining gentle pressure on the orc's shoulder while the other periodically wiped away fresh blood or applied salve as Martha directed. "What is your name?" Caleb asked suddenly, surprising himself. The question felt important somehow, a way to acknowledge that this was not just a body to be mended but a person. The orc stared at him for a long moment. Then, in a voice rough with pain and disuse, he rasped, "Thora." A female name. Caleb's eyes widened as comprehension crashed over him. He had assumed the warrior's size and build meant male, but now looking more carefully he could see the subtle differences in bone structure, the curve of hip beneath the leather armor someone had already cut away. This was an orc woman. "Thora," he repeated, testing the name. "I am Caleb." "This is Martha." Thora nodded once, a tiny movement that still made her wince. Her eyes were already sliding closed again, consciousness a tenuous thing she could not quite maintain. By the time Martha finished the last stitch, the orc woman had slipped back into fevered unconsciousness. "She will need constant care for the next few days," Martha said wearily, setting aside her needle. "The fever must break or we will lose her. Someone needs to keep the wounds clean, make her drink water and broth, watch for signs of infection." "I will do it," Caleb heard himself say. Martha looked at him sharply. "Your father will not approve. No one in town will approve." "My father died last winter," Caleb replied quietly. "I have only myself to answer to now, and you said yourself that your hands shake too much for this work." The old healer studied him with eyes that had seen far too much of human nature, both its cruelty and its capacity for unexpected kindness. Finally, she nodded. "Then you will stay here. I have a spare room, but Caleb, if anyone asks, you are helping me with general chores, nothing more." "The town does not need to know about her." "Agreed." They moved Thora to a small room at the back of the cottage, the one Martha usually used for patients who needed extended care. The orc woman barely stirred as they maneuvered her massive frame onto the narrow bed. and Caleb had to adjust her carefully so that her feet did not hang too far off the edge. He covered her with clean blankets, then stood back to survey their work. In the soft lamplight, with her face relaxed in sleep, Thora looked younger than her 20 summers, vulnerable in a way that sat at odds with every story Caleb had ever heard about savage orc warriors. He found himself wondering what had brought her into human territory, why she had been running, who had shot her in the back like a coward. "Get some rest," Martha said from the doorway. "I will sit with her for a few hours, then wake you to take a turn. She will need water when she wakes, and there is broth warming by the fire." Caleb nodded and retreated to the small room Martha indicated, but sleep did not come easily. He lay awake listening to the sounds of the cottage settling around him, and beneath it all, the ragged breathing of the orc warrior in the next room. The next 3 days blurred together into an exhausting routine of care and vigilance. Thora's fever spiked dangerously high that first night, and Caleb spent hours bathing her face and neck with cool cloths, trying to bring her temperature down. She thrashed and muttered in her own language, lost in fever dreams that seemed to hold as much fear as pain. During one of these episodes, she grabbed Caleb's wrist with surprising strength, her amber eyes opening but seeing something other than the room around her. She spoke urgently in Orcish, the words tumbling over each other too fast for him to separate even if he had understood the language. There was pleading in her voice and grief, and beneath it all a bone-deep exhaustion. "SHH," Caleb soothed, gently prying her fingers from his wrist so he could press a cool cloth to her forehead. "You are safe. No one will hurt you here." Whether she understood or not, his voice seemed to calm her. She subsided back into the pillows, still muttering but less agitated. Caleb continued his ministrations, changing out the warm cloths for fresh, cool ones, adjusting the blankets when she shivered despite the fever. By the second day, the fever had not broken but at least stopped climbing. Thora drifted in and out of consciousness, and during her more lucid moments, Caleb managed to coax small amounts of water and broth into her. She watched him with those unsettling amber eyes, tracking his movements around the room but saying nothing. It was during one of these quiet moments, as Caleb carefully changed the bandages on her shoulder, that she finally spoke. "Why?" The single word was rough, barely more than a whisper, but it held a universe of confusion. Caleb did not pretend to misunderstand. "Because you needed help," he said simply, tying off the fresh bandage. "I am orc. You are hurt. That matters more." Thora studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then her eyes closed again, and Caleb thought she had drifted back to sleep. But as he turned to leave, she spoke once more. "Thank you." The words were so soft he almost missed them, but they settled into his chest with unexpected warmth. Caleb found himself smiling despite the exhaustion that pulled at his bones. "You are welcome, Thora." On the third day, the fever finally broke. Caleb woke from an uneasy doze in the chair beside her bed, to find Thora watching him with clear, alert eyes. The glassy confusion of fever had burned away, leaving behind sharp intelligence and a wariness that seemed more calculated than fearful. "Good morning," he said, straightening in the chair and wincing as his back protested. "How do you feel?" "Like I was shot and left for dead," Thora replied, her voice stronger now though still rough, "which I suppose I was." There was dark humor in the words, and Caleb found himself appreciating it. "Can you drink something? You need to get your strength back." He helped her sit up carefully, mindful of the stitches in her shoulder, and brought a cup of water to her lips. Thora drank deeply, then accepted the warm broth he offered next. She consumed it with single-minded focus, and Caleb could practically see the life flowing back into her with each swallow. "Better?" he asked when she had finished. "Better," she confirmed. Then, after a pause, I need to leave. It is not safe for you to have me here. You are not well enough to travel, and where would you go? Thora's jaw tightened. Away from human lands, back to my clan if they will still have me. Why would they not? The question seemed to catch her off guard. She looked away, her expression closing off. Because I failed. Because I showed weakness. Because I trusted the wrong people and nearly got myself killed for it. There was a story there, one written in the bitter lines around her mouth, and the way her hand unconsciously moved to the bandaged wound on her shoulder. Caleb wanted to press for details, but he could see the exhaustion settling over her again like a blanket. Rest now, he said gently. You can decide what to do when you are stronger. Until then, you are safe here. Thora looked at him again, those amber eyes searching his face for something he could not name. Whatever she found seemed to satisfy her, because she nodded slowly and let him help her lie back down. Over the next week, Thora healed with a speed that surprised both Caleb and Martha. Orc constitution was apparently even stronger than the story suggested, because the wounds that should have taken weeks to mend were already showing significant improvement after only days. The stitches held clean and tight, with no signs of the infection they had feared. As Thora grew stronger, she also grew more restless. She chafed at being confined to bed, and by the 5th day she was insisting on sitting up for longer periods despite the pain it caused. Caleb found himself in the odd position of trying to convince a warrior who could probably break him in half to take things slowly. You will tear the stitches, he warned, as Thora attempted to stand on her own for the first time. I have had worse and kept fighting, she replied stubbornly, but she also accepted his offered arm for support. They made it 3 steps before her legs buckled. Caleb caught her, staggering under her weight but managing to keep them both upright. For a moment they stood frozen, Thora's pride warring with the reality of her weakened state. Perhaps tomorrow, she finally conceded, letting him help her back to bed. Perhaps tomorrow, Caleb agreed, biting back a smile. It became a pattern. Each day Thora pushed herself a little further, and each day Caleb was there to catch her when she pushed too hard. He brought her meals and helped her wash, work that required an intimacy that should have been awkward but somehow was not. Thora accepted his help with growing grace, and Caleb learned to read her moods, to know when she needed to rest even if she would not admit it. They talked during those long days of recovery. At first the conversations were shallow things, careful exchanges of basic information. Thora told him about orc healing practices, which involved significantly more bloodletting and cauterization than human methods. Caleb described the frontier settlement where he lived, the farm he had inherited from his father, the rhythms of rural life. But gradually, as trust built in small increments, the conversations deepened. One evening, as Caleb changed the bandages on Thora's shoulder with practiced ease, she told him how she had come to be shot. There was a human woman, she said quietly, staring at the far wall rather than meeting his eyes. She came to the border territories seeking help. Her husband had been taken by raiders not orcs, but human bandits who prey on isolated homesteads. She had heard stories about orc mercenaries and thought perhaps we could be hired to get him back. Could you? Yes. My warband agreed to help her. We tracked the bandits to their camp, freed her husband and 3 others who had been captured. It should have been a victory. Thora's voice went flat. But when we returned, there was a group of human soldiers waiting. The woman had told them everything where we would be when we would return. She used us to save her husband, then betrayed us to collect the bounty on orc heads. Caleb's hands stilled on the bandage he was tying. What happened to your warband? Dead, all of them. I only escaped because I was scouting ahead and saw the ambush before I rode into it. I tried to warn the others, but She trailed off, her jaw clenching. I ran. Like a coward, I turned and ran. They shot me as I fled, but I kept going. I do not even know how far I traveled before I collapsed. The pain in her voice was not physical. Caleb carefully finished securing the bandage, then sat back on his heels. You are not a coward. You tried to warn them. And if you had stayed, you would be dead too. There is no honor in throwing your life away for nothing. My clan may not see it that way. Then your clan are fools. The blunt words startled a laugh out of Thora, short and sharp but genuine. She looked at him with something like wonder. You are a strange human, Caleb Brennan. So I have been told. After that, something shifted between them. The wariness that had colored their interactions faded, replaced by an easy companionship that surprised them both. Thora began to smile more, a slight upturn of her lips that softened her fierce features. Caleb found himself looking forward to the time he spent in her room, the conversations that ranged from serious to silly and back again. Martha noticed, of course. The old healer watched them with knowing eyes but said nothing, just left them to their growing friendship with the quiet approval of someone who had seen enough of the world to know that connection was precious regardless of where it came from. By the 10th day, Thora was strong enough to walk around the cottage on her own, though she still tired easily. Caleb had returned to his farm to take care of the animals and check on things, but he came back each evening to help Martha and, if he was honest with himself, to see Thora. He arrived one evening to find her standing by the window, looking out at the forest beyond. The setting sun cast golden light across her green skin, and for a moment Caleb could only stare. She was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with human standards of beauty, and everything to do with the fierce grace inherent in her. The way she held herself even when injured, the intelligence that shone in her amber eyes. You are staring, Thora said without turning around. Caleb felt heat rise in his cheeks. Sorry, I was just thinking you look much better than when we first brought you here. I am alive because of you and Martha. She turned to face him, her expression serious. I owe you a life debt, Caleb Brennan. Among my people, that is not a thing taken lightly. You owe me nothing, Caleb protested. Anyone would have done the same. No, they would not have. Thora crossed the room to stand before him, and even weakened by injury she was imposing. Most humans would have left me to die. Or killed me themselves. You chose differently, and that choice saved my life. I will not forget it. The intensity in her gaze made Caleb's breath catch. He found himself very aware of how close she stood, of the way her presence seemed to fill the small room. I am glad you are alive, Thora. Truly? Something flickered in her eyes, an emotion there and gone too quickly for him to name. She reached out slowly, giving him time to pull away, and rested her hand on his shoulder. Her touch was warm even through his shirt, her palm rough with calluses from sword and bow. Thank you, she said quietly, for everything. Then she stepped back, breaking the moment, and Caleb could breathe again. He nodded, not trusting his voice, and turned to help Martha with the evening meal. But as they ate together, the three of them crowded around Martha's small table, Caleb felt the weight of Thora's gaze on him. And when he met her eyes across the table, the smile she gave him was small and private, meant only for him. That night, lying in his borrowed bed, Caleb admitted to himself what he had been trying to ignore for days. He was attracted to Thora. More than attracted, he was developing feelings for her that went far beyond simple friendship or caretaker obligation. The realization should have horrified him. Orcs and humans did not mix. It was unthinkable, forbidden, the stuff of cautionary tales told to scare children. But when he thought of Thora's smile, of her dry humor and fierce pride and the vulnerability she had shown him, he could not bring himself to care about taboos or propriety. She was simply Thora, and he wanted to know her better, to learn all the pieces of her that she had not yet shared. The problem, of course, was that she would be leaving soon. As soon as she was fully healed, she would return to her clan and he would likely never see her again. The thought sat like a stone in his chest. 2 more days passed. Thora continued to gain strength, and the stitches in her shoulder were ready to come out. Martha removed them with practiced efficiency while Caleb watched, and the relief on Thora's face when the last thread was pulled free was profound. "How does it feel?" Caleb asked. Thora rolled her shoulder experimentally, testing the range of motion. There was still some stiffness, but the wound had healed cleanly into a scar that would fade with time. "Good, very good. I should be able to travel within a day or 2. The words sent a jolt through Caleb. He had known this was coming, but hearing it stated so plainly made it real in a way it had not been before. "Where will you go?" "North, to the mountains where my clan makes their winter camp. If they will not take me back, I will find another clan or go alone. Either way, I cannot stay here much longer. It is too dangerous for you and Martha." "We are not afraid," Caleb said. "Perhaps you should be." Thora's expression was grim. "If anyone discovers you have been harboring an orc, there will be consequences. I will not have your kindness repaid with violence." That evening, after Martha had gone to bed, Caleb found Thora outside. She stood in the small garden behind the cottage, her face turned up to the stars that wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. The night was cool, autumn settling into its final descent toward winter, and Caleb's breath misted in the air. "Could not sleep?" he asked, coming to stand beside her. "Too much sleep lately," Thora replied. "I am restless. My body is healed enough to move, to fight if needed, and it craves action. Give it another day at least. Make sure everything is fully mended before you push yourself." Thora glanced at him sidelong. "You worry too much, Caleb Brennan. Someone has to." "You certainly do not worry enough about yourself," she laughed softly. "Fair enough." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment before Thora spoke again. "I will miss this. These quiet moments, your terrible jokes." "My jokes are not terrible, they are charmingly rustic." "They are terrible," Thora said, but she was smiling. Then the smile faded and she turned to face him fully. "I wish things were different. I wish I could stay or you could come with me, but neither of those things is possible." The words hung between them, heavy with everything unsaid. Caleb's heart hammered in his chest as he realized what she was really saying, that the feelings growing between them were not one-sided, that she felt this impossible pull just as he did. "Why is it not possible?" he asked quietly. "Because you are human and I am orc. Because my people would never accept you, and yours would never accept me. Because there is no place in this world where we could simply be together without fear or judgment. So we do nothing. We just let you walk away and pretend we never met." Thora's expression was anguished. "What else can we do, Caleb? I will not ask you to give up your life here, your home and your work. And I cannot stay in human lands even if I wanted to. It is too dangerous for everyone involved. There is no solution that does not end in pain." "Maybe pain is worth it," Caleb said, surprising himself with his own intensity. "Maybe a few months or years of happiness together is better than a lifetime of wondering what might have been." For a moment he thought she might agree, saw the hope flare in her amber eyes. But then she shook her head and the hope died. "No, I will not do that to you. You deserve better than a doomed love affair with an orc warrior who will only bring you trouble." Her voice was firm, but Caleb could hear the pain beneath it. "I leave the day after tomorrow. It is decided." She turned and walked back into the cottage, leaving Caleb alone in the garden with his heart breaking and no idea how to fix it. The next day was torture. They were both careful around each other, polite and distant in a way they had not been since those first wary days. Martha watched with sad eyes but said nothing, respecting their choice even as she clearly disapproved of it. Caleb threw himself into chores, fixing a loose shutter and repairing a section of fence that had been neglected. Physical work kept his hands busy even if it did nothing to quiet his mind. He kept circling back to Thora's words, to the resignation in her voice when she said there was no solution. But there had to be a solution. He refused to believe that something as arbitrary as species should determine whether two people could be together. The world was changing, the frontier territories growing more settled and civilized each year. Surely there was room somewhere for something new, for people who did not fit neatly into the old categories. He was still wrestling with these thoughts when riders appeared on the road leading to Martha's cottage. 4 men, armed and wearing the leather armor of border militia. Caleb's blood ran cold as he recognized the leader, Thomas Kane, a hard man who made no secret of his hatred for orcs and anyone he considered orc sympathizers. Caleb abandoned his tools and hurried toward the cottage, arriving just as Thomas and his men dismounted. Martha had come to the door, her elderly frame blocking the entrance with surprising determination. "What do you want, Thomas?" she asked, her voice cool. "We are looking for an orc," Thomas replied bluntly. "Female, badly wounded. Tracks led this direction before we lost the trail." "You seen anything?" "No," Martha lied without hesitation. "But then again, I am just an old woman who keeps to herself. Perhaps you should look elsewhere." Thomas's eyes narrowed. He gestured to his men who began to spread out. "We will just have a look around if it is all the same to you." "You will not," Caleb said, stepping forward. "You have no authority to search private property without cause." "The cause is an orc loose in the territory, boy," Thomas snarled. "Or are you an orc lover too? I always wondered about you Brennans living out here on the edge of things. Maybe you like the savages more than your own kind." Caleb's hands clenched into fists, but before he could respond, there was movement from inside the cottage. Thora stepped into the doorway, her expression calm despite the danger. She had her bow in hand, an arrow already nocked though not yet drawn. "I am the orc you seek," she said clearly. "And you will leave this place now, or I will put an arrow through your leader's eye." The men froze, hands going to their weapons. But Thora was faster, drawing the bow in one smooth motion and aiming at Thomas. At this range, she could not possibly miss, and they all knew it. "She is injured," Thomas said, though he sounded less certain now. "She cannot have healed enough to fight." "Test me and find out," Thora replied coldly. The standoff stretched for several heartbeats. Then Caleb moved to stand beside Thora, very deliberately placing himself between her and the men. "You are trespassing on Martha's land and threatening her guests. Leave now, or I will report you to the territorial magistrate." It was a weak threat and they all knew it, but it gave Thomas an excuse to back down without losing too much face. He spat on the ground and gestured to his men. "This is not over. That orc is a wanted criminal, and anyone who harbors her is committing a crime." "She has done nothing wrong," Caleb said firmly, "but you are welcome to take it up with the magistrate if you disagree." Thomas mounted his horse, the others following suit. But before he rode away, he fixed Caleb with a look of pure contempt. "Your father would be ashamed of you, Brennan, protecting a monster over your own people." "My father taught me to judge people by their actions, not their race," Caleb shot back. "Thora is more honorable than you will ever be." The men rode off, leaving behind an oppressive silence. As soon as they were out of sight, Thora lowered her bow and turned to Caleb with fury in her eyes. "Why did you do that? Why did you put yourself at risk for me?" "Because it was the right thing to do." "There is no right or wrong here, only survival. You just made yourself a target, Caleb. They will come after you now, question your loyalty, make your life difficult. Let them try. This is not a game. Thora's voice rose, genuine fear breaking through her anger. You do not understand what you have done. Thomas Kane is the kind of man who holds grudges, who makes people disappear when they cross him. You are in danger now because of me. I was already in danger the moment I agreed to help Martha treat your wounds, Caleb replied calmly. I made my choice then, and I stand by it now. You are not going to scare me away with warnings about consequences. Thora stared at him, breathing hard, her amber eyes wide. Then, to his complete surprise, she laughed a short, sharp bark of sound that held equal parts exasperation and admiration. You are completely impossible, she said. So I have been told. Martha cleared her throat from where she still stood in the doorway. Perhaps we should continue this conversation inside before those men decide to come back with reinforcements. They retreated into the cottage, and Martha immediately began packing a bag with supplies: dried food, healing herbs, clean bandages. Thora, you need to leave tonight, not tomorrow. They will be back, probably with more men, and Caleb, you should go with her. What? They said simultaneously. Martha fixed them both with a stern look. Do not play stupid with me. I may be old, but I still have eyes. You two care for each other, anyone can see it. And after today, Caleb is going to have the same problems here that Thora would. Thomas will make sure of it. So you might as well leave together. I cannot ask him to abandon his home, Thora protested. You are not asking. I am telling him to use his head and get out while he still can. Martha turned to Caleb. Your farm will still be there when this blows over, if it blows over. But you will not be any use to it if Thomas decides to make an example of you. Go with Thora. Keep each other safe. Figure out the rest as you go. Caleb looked at Thora, saw his own shock and confusion reflected in her face. But beneath it, he also saw hope, fragile and tentative, but there. Would your clan accept me? He asked her directly. Could I survive among orcs? Thora's expression was conflicted. I do not know. Humans and orcs do not live together. There are no examples to point to, no precedents. You would be an outsider, perhaps always. It would be hard. Harder than staying here and facing Thomas's wrath. Different hard. But possible. Thora held his gaze for a long moment, then slowly nodded. Possible. If you are willing to try. If you can accept that it may not work, that we may end up outcasts from both our peoples. Caleb thought about his farm, the life he had built in the shadow of his father's legacy. It was comfortable and familiar, but it was also small and limited in ways he had never quite acknowledged before. The thought of leaving it behind should have terrified him. Instead, he felt a strange sense of relief, as if he had been waiting his whole life for permission to choose something different. When do we leave? He asked. The look Thora gave him in that moment was worth every risk, every uncertainty. It was gratitude and wonder and something deeper that neither of them was quite ready to name. At nightfall, she said, we travel north through the forest, avoiding the roads. It will be a hard journey, especially with winter coming. Then we should start preparing. They spent the remaining hours of daylight gathering supplies and making plans. Caleb rode to his farm to collect his horse, some clothes, and the small amount of money he had saved. He left a note for his neighbors asking them to look after the place, knowing it was inadequate but not sure what else to do. When he returned to Martha's cottage, full dark had fallen. Thora was ready, dressed in traveling leathers that Martha had somehow procured, her bow and a quiver of arrows strapped to her back. She had regained her warrior bearing, all traces of the injured patient gone. Martha hugged them both, her old eyes bright with tears. Be safe, be happy. And do not come back until you are sure it is truly safe. Thank you, Caleb said, his throat tight. "For everything." "Just make sure my nursing was not wasted," Martha replied tartly. "Now go before I start crying properly and make a fool of myself." They slipped into the forest under cover of darkness, Caleb leading his horse while Thora moved beside him with the easy grace of someone at home in wild places. The moon was waning but still bright enough to see by, and Thora navigated with confidence despite the unfamiliar territory. They traveled in silence for the first hour, all their focus on putting distance between themselves and the settlement. But once they were deep enough into the forest that the risk of immediate pursuit seemed small, Thora called a halt near a small stream. "We should rest the horse," she said, "and talk about what happens next." Caleb nodded and led his gelding to the water, letting the animal drink while he and Thora sat on a fallen log nearby. The forest was alive with night sounds, owls calling, small creatures rustling through the undergrowth, the eternal whisper of wind through leaves. "I am sorry," Thora said abruptly. "I never meant to bring all this trouble down on you. If I had died in the forest, you would still be safe in your home." "If you had died in the forest, I would never have known you," Caleb countered, "and I am beginning to think that would have been the greater loss." Thora looked at him, her amber eyes luminous in the moonlight. "You barely know me, Caleb. We have spent less than 2 weeks together, most of it while I was half dead. You are throwing away your entire life for someone who is essentially a stranger. You do not feel like a stranger." The simple honesty of the statement seemed to disarm her. She looked away, her jaw working as if she was trying to find the right words. Finally, she said, "You feel familiar to me too, like something I have been searching for without knowing what I sought, but familiarity is not enough to build a life on." "Then what is? I do not know. Trust, maybe. Respect, shared goals and values." She paused, then added quietly, "Love, eventually, if we are lucky." "I think we could get there," Caleb said. "To love, I mean, if we are both willing to try." Thora turned back to him, and the vulnerability in her expression took his breath away. "I want to try. I did not think I would. I told myself I would leave and forget you, that it was impossible and foolish to even consider. But when those men came, when I saw you step between us to protect me, I realized I did not want to forget. I wanted to remember everything." Caleb reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. Her palm was rough against his, her fingers long and strong. "Then we remember, we try. We figure it out as we go. That is all we can do. It will not be easy. Nothing worthwhile ever is." Thora laughed softly and squeezed his hand. "You are too optimistic for your own good, Caleb Brennan. And you are too pessimistic, Thora." He trailed off, realizing he did not know her full name. "Vargstatir," she supplied. "Daughter of Varg, chief of the Stone Bear clan. Or I was before I failed him." "You did not fail anyone. You survived. That takes strength, not weakness. My clan may not see it that way. Then we will make them see it, together." They sat in comfortable silence after that, hands still linked, listening to the night. Eventually, Caleb broke the quiet with a practical question. "How far to your clan's winter camp?" 2 weeks on foot, maybe less if we can manage to ride double on your horse for part of the journey. "We will need to be careful once we get closer. There are human settlements and orc territories that overlap in the northern hills, and neither side trusts the other. We will be vulnerable, especially you." "I can handle myself." "I know, but let me worry anyway." The tenderness in her voice made Caleb smile. "Fair enough." They traveled through the night, resting periodically to spare the horse. By dawn they had covered significant ground, and Thora judged it safe enough to make a proper camp. She found a sheltered spot among the roots of a massive oak, and they laid out their bedrolls in companionable silence. "You should sleep first," Thora said. "I will keep watch. Are you sure? You are still recovering." I am sure. I slept enough at Martha's to last me a month. Besides, I am better suited to spotting danger in the wild. Caleb could not argue with that logic, so he settled into his bedroll and was asleep within minutes, exhaustion claiming him almost instantly. He woke to afternoon sunlight slanting through the trees and the smell of rabbit roasting over a small fire. Thora sat cross-legged by the fire, turning the spit with practiced ease. She had removed her leather jerkin, and Caleb could see the bandages still wrapped around her ribs beneath her undershirt. The sight reminded him how recently she had been near death and how remarkable her recovery had been. "You should have woken me sooner," he said, sitting up. "You need rest too." "I rested while you slept. Orcs do not need as much sleep as humans." She glanced at him with a slight smile. "Are you always this grumpy when you wake?" "Only when people make decisions about my welfare without consulting me." "Well, you can make the next decision." "Do you want the leg or the haunch?" The rabbit was excellent, seasoned with wild herbs Thora had gathered. They ate quickly, both aware that lingering was dangerous, then broke camp and continued north. The pattern repeated over the next several days, traveling by night, sleeping in shifts during the day, gradually making their way deeper into the wilderness. As they traveled, they talked. Long conversations about everything and nothing, sharing the stories of their lives in a way that felt both natural and profound. Caleb learned about Thora's childhood among the Stone Bear clan, how she had trained as a warrior from the age of 10, how her father had led their people with wisdom and strength until he was killed in a border skirmish 3 years ago. "I was supposed to take his place someday," Thora said quietly one evening as they walked. "Lead the clan as he did, but I do not think I have it in me. Leadership requires certainty, and I doubt everything." "Doubt is not weakness," Caleb replied. "My father used to say that a leader who never questions their decisions is a tyrant in waiting." "Your father sounds like he was a wise man." "He was stubborn as a mule and twice as ornery, but wise. I miss him." Thora reached out and briefly touched his shoulder, a gesture of comfort that warmed Caleb despite the cool night air. They walked on in silence, but it was a comfortable silence, the kind that only comes when two people are truly at ease with each other. On the 7th day of their journey, they encountered their first real danger. They had just crossed a ridge when Thora suddenly froze, her hand shooting out to stop Caleb. Below them, in a small valley, was a camp, but not orc or human. The creatures moving about were twisted things, hunched and misshapen, with mottled gray skin and too many teeth. "Goblins," Thora whispered. "At least a dozen. We need to go around." But even as she spoke, the wind shifted, carrying their scent down into the valley. The goblins' heads snapped up as one, and their guttural shrieks split the air. Within seconds, they were scrambling up the hillside toward Caleb and Thora. "Run," Thora commanded, and they ran. The goblins were fast, faster than Caleb would have thought possible for creatures with such awkward gaits. They poured up the hillside in a chittering wave, armed with crude spears and jagged knives. Thora had her bow out and was shooting as she ran, each arrow finding its mark with lethal precision. Goblins fell, but more kept coming. They crested another ridge, and Thora made a snap decision, veering toward a rocky outcropping that would give them a defensible position. They scrambled up the rocks with the goblins right behind them, and suddenly they were fighting for their lives. Caleb had his hunting knife out, slashing at the first goblin that reached him. The creature shrieked and fell back, clutching at the wound, but 2 more took its place. Beside him, Thora had switched to her short sword, the blade flashing in the fading light as she moved with deadly efficiency. They fought back to back, defending the narrow approach to their rocky shelter. Thora's movements were fluid despite her recent injuries, each strike economical and precise. She carved through goblins like a scythe through wheat, and Caleb did his best to protect her flanks and keep the creatures from overwhelming them, but there were so many. For every goblin that fell, another appeared. Caleb's arms burned with exhaustion, and he could hear Thora's breathing becoming labored. They could not keep this up much longer. Then Thora did something Caleb did not expect. She threw back her head and let out a ululating war cry, a sound that echoed off the rocks and through the valley. It was primal and fierce, and it seemed to give even the goblins pause. And then, impossibly, it was answered. From the forest to the north came more cries, deeper and stronger. Caleb's heart leaped into his throat as he saw figures emerging from the tree's orcs, at least 6 of them, running toward the fight with weapons drawn. The goblins, caught between Caleb and Thora above, and the new arrivals below, suddenly found themselves surrounded. They broke and scattered, fleeing into the forest in all directions. The orcs gave chase, cutting down those they could catch. Within minutes, the fight was over. Caleb and Thora stood panting among the goblin corpses, alive but barely. Then the orcs were climbing up to their position, and Caleb got his first clear look at Thora's people. They were all massive, even the females, with skin in various shades of green and gray. They wore leather and fur, carried weapons that looked well used, and regarded Caleb with open suspicion. But when they looked at Thora, the suspicion turned to shock. "Thora," one of them said, a male with a scar running across his face, "we thought you were dead. Not dead, wounded, but recovering." Thora's voice was steady despite her exhaustion. She gestured to Caleb. "This is Caleb Brennan. He saved my life. He is under my protection." The scarred orc's gaze shifted to Caleb, and the assessment was not friendly. "A human. You bring a human into our territory, I do, and he will be treated with respect, Brock, or I will take it as a personal insult." The 2 orcs stared at each other, something unspoken passing between them. Finally, Brock nodded slowly. "The clan will want to hear your story, both of you. Come, we will escort you to the winter camp." They were given no choice in the matter, surrounded by the orc warriors, and marched north through the gathering dusk. Caleb kept close to Thora, very aware of the hostile glances directed his way. But Thora walked with her head high, her hand occasionally brushing against his in silent reassurance. The Stone Bear clan's winter camp was a collection of sturdy structures built into the side of a mountain, half cave and half construction. Smoke rose from multiple fires, and Caleb could see dozens of orcs moving about their business. Every one of them stopped to stare as the group entered camp, and the whispers started immediately. They were brought before a large tent at the center of camp. Brock ducked inside, then emerged a moment later and gestured for them to enter. Thora squeezed Caleb's hand once, then led the way inside. The tent's interior was warm and smoky, lit by braziers that cast dancing shadows on the walls. At the center, seated on a chair made of wood and bone, was the largest orc Caleb had ever seen. His hair was gray with age, but his body was still thick with muscle, and his eyes were the same amber as Thora's. "Uncle," Thora said, bowing her head respectfully, "I have returned, so I see." The chieftain's voice was deep as thunder. "We mourned you, Thora Vargstadir. We burned offerings for your spirit and cursed the humans who slew your warband, and now you appear with a human at your side. Explain." So Thora explained. She told the story of the ambush, her escape, waking in Martha's cottage to find humans tending her wounds. She spoke of Caleb's care, of how he had risked everything to keep her safe, of the confrontation with Thomas Kane and their flight into the wilderness. Through it all, the chieftain listened in silence, his expression unreadable. When Thora finished, he turned his attention to Caleb. And you, human, why did you save an orc? Why risk your life and home for one of a people you have been taught to fear and hate? Caleb met the chieftain's gaze squarely, refusing to show fear. Because it was the right thing to do, and because Thora is worth saving regardless of what she is. Worth saving, the chieftain repeated thoughtfully. You have feelings for my niece. It was not a question, but Caleb answered anyway. Yes. A ripple went through the assembled orcs at this admission. The chieftain held up a hand for silence, then stood and approached Caleb. He was easily a foot taller, and Caleb had to tilt his head back to maintain eye contact. I am Korg Ironhide, war chief of the Stone Bear clan, he said formally. You have done our clan a great service by preserving the life of Thora, who is precious to us. For this, you have our gratitude. But you are human, and humans have given us little reason to trust. So I will ask you plainly, what are your intentions? To stay with Thora if she will have me, to prove myself worthy of her and of this clan's acceptance, to build a life here if that is possible. And if it is not possible, if the clan cannot accept a human among us. Caleb glanced at Thora, who was watching him with wide eyes. Then he looked back at Korg. Then we will go somewhere else and build a life there, but I would prefer to stay. Thora loves her people. She should not have to choose between them and me if there is any way to avoid it. Korg studied him for a long moment, then, to Caleb's surprise, smiled. It transformed his fierce face into something almost gentle. You have courage, Caleb Brennan, and you speak with honesty. These are qualities the Stone Bear clan values. He turned to address the gathered orcs. This human saved Thora's life and asks nothing in return except to be with her. What say the clan? The response was mixed. Some orcs nodded approval, while others muttered darkly about tradition and the dangers of trusting humans. Korg let the debate run for several minutes before holding up his hand again. The clan is divided, as I expected, so we will let actions speak louder than words. Caleb Brennan, I offer you a trial by living. You will stay with us through the winter. You will contribute to the clan's welfare, learn our ways, and prove whether a human can truly become one of us. At spring's thaw, we will decide whether you have earned the right to stay permanently. Do you accept these terms? I do, Caleb said without hesitation. Then it is settled. Thora, you will be responsible for him. Teach him, guide him, and answer for his actions. If he fails, the shame falls on you as well. Thora bowed deeply. I understand, Uncle. Thank you for this chance. Korg waved them away, and they were escorted out of the tent. As soon as they were alone, or as alone as they could be in a camp full of curious onlookers, Thora grabbed Caleb's arm. Are you certain about this? She asked urgently. A winter among orcs will be harsh. The work is hard, the cold is bitter, and not everyone will be welcoming. You could still leave, go back to human lands. I could, Caleb agreed, but I will not. I meant what I said in there. I want to be with you, Thora. I want to try to make this work. The smile she gave him was radiant. Then we will make it work, together. They were given a small dwelling on the edge of camp, a one-room structure that was part dugout, part tent. It was sparse but functional, with a fire pit, sleeping furs, and storage for supplies. Thora set about making it more comfortable while Caleb brought in their gear. We will need to gather more firewood before true winter hits, Thora said, poking at the fire. And you will need warmer clothes. The leather you have will not be enough when the snows come. I can hunt and trap, Caleb offered, trade furs for supplies. Good, that will help. Thora settled onto the furs and patted the space beside her. Caleb sat, and they were quiet for a moment, the weight of everything finally settling over them. I cannot believe we are here, Thora said softly. 2 weeks ago I was dying in the forest. Now I am home with you beside me. It feels like a dream. If it is a dream, I hope I never wake up. Thora turned to him, her expression serious. Caleb, I need you to understand something. What I feel for you is real. It is strong and it terrifies me because I have never felt this way before. But we are at the beginning of something, not the end. We have much to learn about each other, and the road ahead will be difficult. I do not want you to have false expectations. I know, Caleb said. I am not expecting perfection. I am just expecting honesty and effort. Can you give me those? Yes, always. Then that is enough. Thora leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his, a gesture that felt profoundly intimate despite its simplicity. They stayed like that for several heartbeats, breathing in sync, drawing comfort from each other's presence. Then Thora pulled back, her eyes bright. Come. I will introduce you to the clan properly. You will need allies if you are going to survive here. The next weeks were a whirlwind of new experiences. Thora introduced Caleb to key members of the clan, starting with Brock the warrior who had found them fighting goblins. Brock was gruff and suspicious at first, but when he saw how hard Caleb worked and how respectfully he treated Thora, his attitude began to soften. You are not completely useless for a human, Brock grunted one afternoon after Caleb had helped him repair a damaged weapon rack. It was high praise coming from him. Caleb also met Grisha, the clan's primary healer, an elderly orc female who reminded him strongly of Martha. She took one look at Thora's healing wounds and immediately conscripted Caleb to help her gather medicinal plants before the first hard freeze. You have good hands, Grisha observed as Caleb carefully harvested roots under her direction. Gentle but sure, Martha taught you well. You know Martha, I met her once many years ago. We traded knowledge of healing. She is a good woman for a human. Grisha fixed him with a shrewd look. You love my Thora. It was not a question, but Caleb answered anyway. I do, or I am falling in love with her. It is hard to say where caring ends and love begins. Smart boy. Love is not a single moment but 1,000 small choices. You choose her day after day, that is what matters. The work was indeed hard. Caleb spent his days helping with whatever tasks needed doing, repairing shelters, hunting, processing game, gathering firewood. The orcs worked from dawn until dusk preparing for winter, and Caleb threw himself into it with determination. He would prove he belonged here, that he could contribute and be valuable. The nights, though, belonged to him and Thora. They would return to their small dwelling exhausted but content, sharing meals and conversation as the fire burned low. Slowly, incrementally, they learned each other's rhythms and habits. Thora was a restless sleeper who often woke in the night and needed reassurance that she was safe. Caleb discovered he liked to wake early and watch the sunrise, and Thora started joining him, the two of them sitting in companionable silence as the world lightened around them. They also learned to navigate the physical attraction that simmered between them. The dwelling was small, privacy minimal, and they were both very aware of each other's presence. But they moved carefully, respecting boundaries even as those boundaries gradually shifted. It started with small touches, a hand on a shoulder, fingers brushing as they passed items back and forth, Thora leaning against Caleb's side as they sat by the fire. Each touch built trust and comfort, creating a foundation of physical intimacy that felt natural rather than forced. One evening, about a month into their stay, they were settling down for the night when Thora paused in braiding her hair. Caleb, would you help me? My shoulder is still stiff sometimes. He moved to sit behind her, taking the thick strands of dark hair in his hands. He had never braided hair before, but he did his best to copy what he had seen Thora do. His fingers were clumsy at first, but she talked him through it patiently. Like this, she instructed, guiding his hands. Over, under, pull tight. Working so close to her, Caleb was intensely aware of her warmth, the subtle scent of leather and pine smoke that clung to her skin. When he finished the braid, he did not immediately pull away. Instead, he rested his hands gently on her shoulders. Thora leaned back into his touch with a soft sigh. "That feels nice." Emboldened, Caleb began to knead the muscles of her shoulders, feeling the knots and tension that had built up from hard work. Thora made a sound that was almost a purr, her head dropping forward to give him better access. "You are very good at this," she murmured. "I used to do this for my father after long days in the fields. It helps." They stayed like that for a while, Caleb working the tension from Thora's shoulders while she relaxed into his care. It was intimate without being sexual, a moment of vulnerability and trust that felt more significant than any kiss. When Caleb finally stopped, Thora turned to face him. Her expression was soft, open in a way he had rarely seen. "Thank you. Any time." She reached up and cupped his face in her palm, her thumb brushing across his cheekbone. "I am glad you are here, Caleb Brennan. Glad you chose to come with me. Glad you are stubborn enough to want to make this work." "I am glad too," he whispered. Thora leaned in slowly, giving him every opportunity to pull away. But Caleb did not pull away. He met her halfway, their lips coming together in a kiss that was gentle and questioning. It lasted only a moment before Thora pulled back, searching his face for his reaction. "Is this okay?" she asked quietly. "More than okay." She smiled and kissed him again, deeper this time but still tender. Caleb's hands came up to rest on her waist and he felt her muscles jump beneath his touch. When they finally broke apart, both breathing a little harder, Thora pressed her forehead to his. "We should go slowly," she said. "I do not want to rush this, neither do I. We have time." They settled into the furs that night lying close, Thora's back pressed against Caleb's chest. It was the first time they had slept in actual contact, and the trust it represented moved Caleb almost more than the kiss had. He wrapped an arm carefully around her waist, and Thora's hand came up to cover his, lacing their fingers together. "Sleep well, Caleb," she murmured. "You too, Thora." As winter deepened, so did their relationship. They continued to work hard during the days, but the nights became their sanctuary. They talked about their hopes and fears, their dreams for a future neither was quite sure they could have. They kissed and held each other, exploring the boundaries of physical intimacy with care and respect. The clan was watching, of course. Everyone could see how Thora and Caleb gravitated toward each other, how their eyes followed each other across the camp, how they moved in sync like partners who had been together for years, rather than months. Opinions remained divided. Some orcs had warmed to Caleb, appreciating his work ethic and the way he treated Thora with obvious respect and affection. Others remained suspicious, convinced that a human could never truly be trusted. The tension came to a head one afternoon in late winter. Caleb was helping to butcher a deer when another young orc, Gorn, made a disparaging comment about humans being too weak for real work. "Caleb works harder than you," Thora shot back, her tone sharp. "Because he is trying to prove something," Gorn sneered. "But we all know he will leave come spring. Humans do not stay. They use and discard. He will do the same to you." Caleb set down his knife carefully. "I am not leaving." "So you say. But when your people call you back, when you remember you are human and she is orc, you will abandon her." "It is what your kind does." "Enough, Gorn," Brock growled from across the work area. "You speak of things you do not understand." "I understand that we are fools for trusting him," Gorn persisted. "He will betray us. It is only a matter of time." Caleb felt anger rising in his chest, but before he could respond, Thora stepped between him and Gorn. Her expression was cold fury. "You question my judgment," she said quietly, dangerously. "You suggest I am too stupid to see betrayal coming. You insult not just Caleb, but me." Gorn had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Thora," I did not mean, yes, you did. And you are wrong. Caleb is more honorable than you will ever be. He has proven himself 100 times over, but you are too blinded by prejudice to see it. She stepped closer to Gorn, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper that still carried in the sudden silence. Speak against him again, and you speak against me. And I promise you, Gorn, you do not want me as an enemy. Gorn stared at her for a long moment, then looked away, acknowledging defeat. The tension slowly drained from the scene as everyone returned to their work, but Caleb could feel the shift. Thora had just publicly claimed him, defending him against one of her own people. The implications were profound. That night, Korg summoned them to his tent again. The chieftain looked tired, older than he had when they first arrived. "You caused quite a scene today," he said without preamble. "Gorn insulted Caleb," Thora replied evenly. "I will not tolerate that. I know, and I am glad you defended him. It shows the clan that you are serious about him." Korg's gaze shifted to Caleb. "Spring is still 2 months away, but I think we have seen enough. You have worked hard, Caleb Brennan. You have learned our ways, respected our traditions, and proven yourself valuable to the clan. More importantly, you have won Thora's heart and she has won yours. The clan is still divided, but the division is smaller than it was. Most now see you as an individual, not just as a human." "Thank you," Caleb said, not sure where this was going. "I am not finished. Thora, you are my brother's daughter and precious to me. I want you to be happy. So I will ask you directly, do you wish to bind yourself to this human? To make him your mate in the eyes of the clan?" Thora's breath caught. She looked at Caleb, her amber eyes wide. Yes, if he wishes it as well." Every eye in the tent turned to Caleb. He felt the weight of the moment, understood that his answer would determine not just his future but Thora's as well. But there was no hesitation in his heart, no doubt about what he wanted. "Yes," he said firmly. "I wish it." Korg nodded slowly. "Then it will be so. In 1 month's time, when the moon of new beginnings rises, we will hold a bonding ceremony. Caleb Brennan will officially become a member of the Stone Bear clan and Thora's recognized mate. Until then, you will both prepare for this commitment. Understand what it means. You will be bound not just to each other but to the clan. Caleb, you will be orc in all but blood. There will be no going back to your human life." "I understand," Caleb said. "I choose this. I choose Thora and the clan. Then it is settled. Go prepare yourselves. And Thora, your father, would be proud of you. You have found someone worthy of the Vargstatir name." They left the tent in a daze, barely speaking as they made their way back to their dwelling. Once inside, with the door flap secured against the cold and curious eyes, they finally looked at each other. "Did that just happen?" Caleb asked. "I think so." Thora laughed, the sound slightly hysterical. "We are going to be bonded, mates, permanently. Are you okay with that? We can still say no if you have doubts." Thora crossed the space between them in 2 steps and pulled him into a fierce hug. "I have no doubts. I want this, Caleb. I want you. I was just not expecting it to happen so soon." Caleb wrapped his arms around her, breathing in the familiar scent of her. "Neither was I, but I am glad. I do not want to wait. I have known for weeks that you are the one I want to spend my life with." Thora pulled back just enough to look at him. "I love you," she said, the words simple but weighted with emotion. "I should have said it sooner, but I was afraid. Afraid you would not feel the same, afraid of jinxing what we have. But I love you, Caleb, completely." "I love you too," he replied, his voice thick. "So much it scares me sometimes. You are everything I did not know I was searching for." They kissed, and it was different from their previous kisses. There was passion, yes, but also a profound tenderness, a promise of forever wrapped up in the meeting of lips. When they finally broke apart, both were smiling. The next month passed in a blur of preparation. Grisha took charge of teaching Caleb the rituals and expectations of an orc bonding ceremony, while Brock and several other warriors coached him on the formal challenges he would need to complete to prove his worthiness. "It is mostly symbolic," Brock assured him. "Tests of strength, courage, and commitment. You will not be fighting to the death or anything so dramatic, but you must complete them all without failing." The challenges included wrestling matches with 3 different warriors. Caleb did not need to win, just show he would not give up. An endurance run through the forest in harsh conditions, and a test where he had to craft a gift for Thora using only materials he gathered himself. Caleb threw himself into preparation, determined not to fail. The wrestling matches were brutal. The orcs did not hold back much, and Caleb accumulated bruises and sore muscles. But he kept getting up, kept fighting, even when it was clear he was outmatched. By the end, even his opponents were nodding with grudging respect. The endurance run was worse. It was held during a blizzard, and Caleb had to navigate to a sacred site in the mountains and back before sunset. He got lost twice, nearly froze, and stumbled back into camp with minutes to spare. But he made it, and that was what mattered. The gift proved most challenging of all. Caleb was no craftsman, and he struggled to figure out what to make that would be meaningful. Finally, inspiration struck. He spent days carving a small wooden figure of a bear, the symbol of Thora's clan, from a piece of oak he had carried all the way from his farm. It was rough and imperfect, but it was made with love and effort, and when he presented it to Grisha for approval, the old healer smiled. "It is perfect," she said. "Thora will treasure it." The night before the bonding ceremony, Caleb and Thora were separated according to tradition. Caleb stayed with Brock and the other warriors, while Thora remained with the clan's women. It felt strange to sleep without her beside him, and Caleb lay awake for hours thinking about what tomorrow would bring. Dawn came cold and clear, the sky a pale blue that promised good weather. The entire clan gathered in the central meeting area, forming a circle around a bonfire that blazed despite the freezing temperature. Caleb was dressed in new clothes, leather and furs gifted by clan members, each piece representing acceptance from the giver. Korg stood beside the fire, resplendent in ceremonial robes decorated with bear claws and intricate beadwork. As Caleb entered the circle, the chieftain's voice rang out. "We gather to witness the bonding of Thora Vargstatir and Caleb Brennan. 2 souls who have chosen each other despite the barriers of blood and history. Caleb has completed the trials. He has proven his strength, his endurance, and his devotion. Now he must make his final pledge." Caleb stepped forward as rehearsed, very aware of every eye upon him. "I, Caleb Brennan, pledge myself to Thora Vargstatir and to the Stone Bear clan. I renounce my old life and embrace this new one. I will be loyal, brave, and true. I will defend the clan with my life and honor Thora with my heart. This I swear before all gathered here." "And I, Thora Vargstatir, accept his pledge." Thora's voice rang out as she entered the circle from the opposite side. She was stunning in a dress of white leather decorated with blue beads, her dark hair braided with silver threads. "I pledge myself to Caleb Brennan. I will be his partner, his shelter, his strength. I will stand beside him in all things. This I swear before all gathered here." They met in the center before the fire, and Korg handed them each a cup of ceremonial mead. They drank, then poured the remainder onto the ground as an offering to the spirits. Korg produced a long strip of leather and bound their wrists together. "You are now bound," he declared. "Two made one. May your love endure through all seasons, all trials, all sorrows and joys. The Stone Bear clan welcomes you both." The clan erupted in cheers, and suddenly Caleb and Thora were surrounded by well-wishers. The leather binding was removed, and they were swept into a celebration that lasted well into the night. There was food and drink, music and dancing, stories told and retold. Through it all, Caleb and Thora stayed close, their hands clasped, stealing moments to look at each other with wonder. They were bonded. Mates. Husband and wife by any terminology. It felt surreal and perfect all at once. Finally, as the celebration wound down and people began to drift off to their own dwellings, Brock appeared beside them with a grin. Tradition says the newly bonded should spend their first night in the sacred grove, away from the camp. It is a chance for privacy, which I imagine you both want. Thora laughed. Thank you, Brock, for everything. You are welcome. Now go before I get sentimental and ruin my reputation. They hiked to the grove in comfortable silence, the moon lighting their path. Someone had already been there. A small tent was set up, with furs and blankets inside, and a fire burning in a sheltered pit. It was private and beautiful, the trees standing sentinel around them. Inside the tent, finally alone, they looked at each other. The nervousness that had been absent during the ceremony suddenly made an appearance. I have never done this, Thora admitted quietly. I mean, I know what happens, but I have never actually. Neither have I, Caleb confessed. So we figure it out together. No expectations, no pressure. Just us. Thora's smile was radiant with relief. Just us. They came together slowly, learning each other with hands and lips, discovering what brought pleasure and what felt awkward. It was clumsy at times, but also sweet and genuine. They laughed at mishaps and murmured encouragements, taking their time to make sure they both felt comfortable and cherished. When they finally joined, it was with a sense of rightness that transcended the physical. This was the ultimate trust, the ultimate vulnerability, and they gave it to each other freely. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the furs, hearts gradually slowing to normal rhythms. I love you, Thora whispered against his chest. I love you too, Caleb replied, his arms tightening around her. My mate, my Thora. She tilted her head up to kiss him, and they lost themselves in each other again, learning and loving until exhaustion finally claimed them both. The winter passed into spring with a swiftness that surprised them both. As the snows melted and the world turned green again, life in the clan settled into comfortable routines. Caleb was no longer seen as an outsider but as one of them, his human heritage acknowledged but no longer defining him. He and Thora built a life together, their dwelling expanding as they added personal touches and comforts. They worked side by side during the days and retreated to their private world at night, their love deepening with every passing week. One evening in early spring, as they sat watching the sunset, Thora rested her hand on her stomach with a thoughtful expression. I think I might be pregnant. Caleb's heart leaped. Really? Are you sure? Not certain, but I have missed my bleeding and I feel different. Grisha will be able to tell me for sure tomorrow. She looked at him, suddenly uncertain. How do you feel about that? We have never really talked about children. I feel like the luckiest man alive, Caleb said honestly, covering her hand with his. If it is true, if we are going to have a baby, then I could not be happier. But Thora, it is your body. If you are not ready, if you want to wait, I am ready, she interrupted. I want this. I want a family with you. They sat in silence after that, watching the sky turn from gold to pink to purple. In the distance, they could hear the sounds of the clan going about their evening routines, children laughing, adults calling to each other, the comfortable noise of community. You ever regret it? Thora asked suddenly. Giving up your human life for this one? Caleb considered the question seriously. Did he miss his farm, his old neighbors, the life he had known? Perhaps sometimes in quiet moments. But when he weighed that against what he had gained, Thora's love, the acceptance of the clan, a sense of belonging he had never quite felt before there was no contest. "No," he said firmly, "not for a single moment. This is where I am meant to be. With you." Thora leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. "Good, because I was not planning to let you go anyway." He laughed and kissed the top of her head. "Good." The next day, Grisha confirmed what Thora suspected. She was indeed pregnant, about 6 weeks along if the healer's estimation was correct. The news spread through the clan quickly, and soon they were receiving congratulations and advice from every direction. Korg was particularly pleased. "A child born of human and orc," he mused. "It will be interesting to see how the bloodlines mix. But regardless, the child will be Stone Bear Clan, loved and protected as any other." As Thora's pregnancy progressed, Caleb found himself marveling at the changes in her body and their lives. She remained active far longer than he thought safe, but Grisha assured him that orc women were hardy and the exercise was good for her. They made plans for the baby, gathering supplies and preparing a corner of their dwelling as a nursery. They also talked about the future in broader terms. The world was changing, slowly but inexorably. More humans were pushing into orc territories, and conflicts were becoming more frequent. But there were also examples, rare but real, of cooperation between the species. Caleb and Thor represented something new, a bridge between two peoples who had been enemies for generations. "Maybe our child will grow up in a world where mixed families are not so unusual," Thora said one evening, her hand resting on her swollen belly. "Maybe we are the beginning of something better." "I hope so," Caleb replied. "I want our child to have every opportunity to never feel like they have to choose between being human or orc. They will be both, and neither, and that will be perfect." The baby was born on a warm summer evening, with Grisha and 3 other clan women attending. Caleb waited outside, pacing anxiously while Brock tried and failed to distract him with stories. When he finally heard the baby's first cry, his knees nearly gave out with relief. Grisha emerged from the dwelling, her old face creased with a smile. "Come meet your daughter, Caleb." He entered to find Thora propped up on the furs, exhausted but radiant. In her arms was a tiny bundle, and when she pulled back the blanket, Caleb saw his daughter for the first time. The baby was perfect, small and wrinkled, with a tuft of dark hair and skin that was a pale olive, somewhere between Thora's green and his own tan. She had her mother's pointed ears and what looked like the beginnings of tiny tusks, but her eyes, when they opened, were human round and a striking gray-green. "She is beautiful," Caleb whispered, sitting carefully beside Thora, "just like her mother." "She has your nose," Thora replied, smiling down at their daughter. "And I think your stubbornness too, judging by how long the labor was." The baby made a small sound and both parents froze, marveling at this tiny life they had created. Caleb reached out a finger and his daughter's hand closed around it with surprising strength. "What should we name her?" Thora asked. They had discussed names over the past months, but nothing had felt quite right. Now, looking at his daughter, one name came to mind. "Mara," he said. "It means beloved in my language, and she is beloved by both of us and by the clan." "Mara," Thora repeated, testing the name. "Yes, Mara Brennan Vargstatir, welcome to the world, little one." The clan welcomed Mara with joy, bringing gifts and blessings. She was the first child born of human and orc parents that anyone could remember, and her arrival was seen as a good omen. Even those who had been skeptical of Caleb's place in the clan could not resist the charm of the tiny baby. As Mara grew, she displayed characteristics of both her parents. She had Thora's fierce determination and Caleb's gentle heart. She was strong like an orc but curious like a human. She was, as Thora had predicted, perfect in her mix of both peoples. Caleb and Thora raised her with love and laughter, teaching her the best of both cultures. She learned orc fighting techniques and human diplomacy, orc stories and human songs. She grew up knowing she was different but never feeling like she was less. Years passed. Caleb's hair began to show gray, and Thora's face gained new lines. But their love remained constant, a foundation upon which they built not just a family but a legacy. Other mixed couples began to emerge, inspired by their example, and the rigid boundaries between human and orc started to blur ever so slightly. On Mara's 10th birthday, Caleb stood watching his daughter practice archery with some of the other clan children. She was laughing, her aim true, completely comfortable in her skin and her place in the world. Thora came to stand beside him, slipping her hand into his. "What are you thinking about?" "About how my life changed the day I agreed to help Martha treat a wounded orc warrior," Caleb replied. "About how a single choice led to all of this. You think we would have found each other anyway, if circumstances had been different? I like to think so. Some connections are meant to be, regardless of how unlikely they seem." Thora leaned her head on his shoulder, and they watched their daughter together. Around them, the Stone Bear clan went about its business, accepting and comfortable with the human who had become one of them. "I love you, Caleb Brennan," Thora said softly. "I love you too, Thora Vargstatir." And in that moment, with his mate beside him and his daughter thriving, Caleb knew he had found exactly where he belonged. The journey had been unexpected, the obstacles significant, but every step had been worth it. He was home, not in a place but in a family, in a love that transcended all the barriers the world tried to place between them. It was, he thought as Mara hit another perfect bullseye and turned to them with a triumphant grin, the best possible ending to a story that had started with an impossible choice. And it was, more importantly, just the beginning of a new story, one written by the family they had created and the bridges they had built between two worlds. The future was uncertain, as all futures were. But facing it with Thora and Mara by his side, Caleb had no fear. Whatever came, they would meet it together, and that, in the end, was all that mattered.